And Australia's beef sustainability scorecard is out. The annual update released just this morning gives a snapshot of where the industry is at. It's used indicators like carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, tracks forest on grazing land, and how much water is used per kilogram of live weight gained. Well, Mark Davey is the chair of the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, and he joins us live. Mark, what's the big takeout?
I think, the headline number we report on every year is that net zero and the reduction we've had on our 2005 baseline. And for the 2021 period, it was a 78.6%. So, a really huge reduction. This is the equivalent of our industry going from 23% of the national accounts down to 6%. So the beef industry is really doing the heavy lifting. And the interesting thing is, we don't yet have methodologies to account for soil carbon sequestration. So there's certainly more things we can measure to demonstrate, because for us, carbon is a feedstock of agriculture. And, we have an ability through the biogenic carbon cycle to really help sequester carbon and help our society reach these emissions targets.
With that 78% reduction, what's driving that?
So a lot of it for this year has been a response in vegetation. So as we broke from that 2021 drought, we've seen the vegetation absorb a lot of carbon. We also had an increase in the herd through that period. So I think it just, as pioneers in carbon measurement and reporting, it starts to give us a snapshot of just the way carbon flows through our natural landscape and the tool that it can be. But yeah, there's obviously MLA have got a huge array of tools they're building out for producers to use in this space through emissions reduction, through carbon sequestration in landscape. So I think the beef industry is doing the heavy lifting, and we've got many more tools at our disposal.
It was interesting to see the link between producers and renewable energy.
And this is something we do a materiality review with our customers, and in one of the major supermarkets said we'd like to understand what the industry's doing to use renewable energy, and I'm thinking, well, we've been innovators in the windmill and in that space for about 150 years, so we just don't tell that story to our stakeholders, and so it was important we start to do that.
Now, also biodiversity, there's been a shift in the amount of land that is managed in that way across the country. Pretty big figures to come out. Yeah,
so it's a challenging one to measure. So we ask producers what activities are they doing to actively measure biodiversity. And it's the equivalent of 160 million hectares of the Australian landscape, so a European landmass within Australia, being actively managed for biodiversity, which is, I think, really
When you think
powerful.
about it on that scale.
Yeah, that's right. It's really powerful, and we want to demonstrate it to Europe because they're very focused on their production systems, and we really want to demonstrate how Australia is different, how we're extensive, why we produce beef the way we do, and why we're global leaders.
Knowing all of this, how tenable is the 2030 target?
It'll be an interesting one. I think there are still so many tools at our disposal, but what we're learning is that carbon fluctuates so much through the environment. It could depend on the weather conditions coming into 2030. But I think with an ambition like this, what the consumer is interested in, and consumers they're tired of being made to feel guilty. They want to know that industry's getting on with the job. And so what they'll want to see is the demonstration of the things we're doing and the data to back that up.
Mark, what does it mean if we don't get there?
I think we'll be able to explain it. I think the idea that you can't set a goal because you might not get there. Like, we're doing a lot of good, and I think what's also lost in this is MLA's research and the tools we're undertaking. They're not just for Australia. They're for the world. They're for live export industries everywhere. So there will be so much global benefit as well as benefit within Australia in this aspect. But I think what it'll also do is educate the consumer on the role of carbon as a feedstock and the fact that it's an input for our agricultural industries, and we need more recognition of that in policy and also in the community.
But in terms of the 2030 goal, obviously it is good to have goals to work towards, but if we don't get there, which many scientists are suggesting we may not get there, does that damage us reputationally on the international stage?
I don't think it does, because we may not have felt it for a brief period a couple of years ago. We were actually climate neutral. So these are largely, carbon flows in and out of our landscape, and if our herd's rebuilding, and unfortunately for the beef industry, the one thing we can't control is the weather. and that will dictate a lot of this. But by putting tools in place and being more resilient, the current reporting is saying we'll get to about 88% of the way there. And I think that will mean that as a share of the national carbon emissions will be from 23% down to about 4%. And I think society will accept that, and there'll be cases where we're sequestering carbon. Where we're sequestering carbon.
It's a tongue twister, that
yeah,
one.
I know, isn't it? All this sequester. Yeah.
Oh, you go, Lynn.
No, I'm just curious about the storytelling here. There's so many great things that have come out of the scorecard today. You talk about the need for the public to know about it, pollies to know about it. How do we do the storytelling?
That is one of our big challenges, and I think because we don't really lack the amount of qualitative metrics we need, the environment is qualitative, we've got to rely on demonstration on the ground, on demonstrating case studies, on helping to get them to understand. And the other issue is we've got to advocate as an industry. We've got to get behind our peak industry bodies. If you look at the live export industry, they're at 0.05% mortality rate on voyages. So that industry, it is a testament to what they're implementing every day. But we're not seeing acceptance of that and of their role, and they're been given global awards for what they do for animal welfare. They're implementing and exporting animal welfare, but they're also feeding people. And there's 5 million children in Asia with severe acute malnutrition. So I think to the big banks and the stakeholders that think it might appeal to certain minority groups to say we don't back live export, they need to be held to account on what are those sustainability grounds.
Just quickly, Mark, we've got Albo on in the coming hour. A key message for him from you?
I think it would be that we've got to invest in better understanding the Australian production system and in pushing back on things like the EU deforestation regulation, which I think Murray Watt announced today. He'd sent a letter saying they were wanting more work in that space. Europe is trying to impose, I think, a lot of their own regulations on the world, and we're a different environment, and so we need to really ensure that we're representing and we're promoting our industries from an Australian context. The other big one is we've got the Science-Based Target Initiative. So 70,000 businesses and trillions of dollars of market cap have signed up to these goals. And we're seeing global companies come to the Australian industry and say, we've committed to zero deforestation, so what's the problem and what are you doing about it? And you kind of have to wonder, does the emperor have any clothes here? Like, do you approach any other aspect of your business in that way? Because I think the banking and finance industry, they're heavily regulated in banking and finance. They don't want to have to regulate food security. So our governments need to step in and need to help set those agendas and help set the Australian context and our production system, because it's to be celebrated. We produce beef in a forest, and that is to our benefit.
Thanks, Mark Davey. We'll leave it there.
Well, still to come, we're live with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Stay with us.